matapang na ako.
Dati, habang si Sari at ang pagmamahal.
My Love Will Make You Disappear is a 2025 Filipino romantic comedy drama film directed by Chad Vidanes and starring Chiu and Paulo Avelino in the lead roles. The movie was created as an emotional romantic drama mixed with comedy and fantasy elements designed to explore loneliness, heartbreak, emotional trauma, healing, and the fear of falling in love again after painful past experiences. Visually, the production uses colorful city lights, warm cafes, rainy streets, crowded apartment buildings, peaceful rooftops, late-night conversations, emotional close-up shots, and soft romantic cinematography to create a dreamy atmosphere balancing humor with emotional sadness. Meanwhile, the film gained major attention because audiences strongly connected with the emotional chemistry between the lead actors and the movie's relatable themes about people who secretly fear emotional attachment while desperately wanting love and understanding. Emotionally, the story begins by introducing a lonely young woman who has spent years emotionally isolating herself after repeated heartbreak and disappointment slowly destroyed her trust in relationships. Despite appearing sarcastic, independent, and emotionally distant in front of others, she secretly carries deep emotional pain and constantly fears becoming emotionally attached because strange coincidences always seem to happen whenever she falls in love as people unexpectedly leave her life, disappear emotionally, or become separated from her through circumstances she cannot control. Meanwhile, rumors begin spreading around her neighborhood that she may secretly carry a curse causing every romantic relationship around her to collapse. Emotionally, these rumors deeply affect her mental state because although part of her knows the curse sounds irrational, she slowly begins believing that love itself may be dangerous for the people she cares about. Visually, the movie carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through awkward conversations, chaotic misunderstandings, embarrassing situations, playful arguments, workplace stress, funny accidents, and emotionally quiet scenes where loneliness becomes visible beneath humor and sarcasm. Meanwhile, her life changes completely after she unexpectedly meets a charming but emotionally troubled young man who hides his own loneliness behind confidence, humor, and carefree behavior despite secretly struggling with personal failure, emotional disappointment, and unresolved family pain. Emotionally, their first interactions are filled with tension, sarcasm, awkward chemistry, and emotional resistance because both characters instinctively protect themselves from vulnerability while secretly craving connection and emotional understanding. Visually, their relationship slowly develops through accidental meetings during rainstorms, crowded public encounters, late-night walks, rooftop conversations, chaotic work situations, emotional silences, and small romantic moments where both characters slowly begin lowering the emotional walls protecting them from heartbreak. Meanwhile, the male lead gradually realizes that despite her cold behavior, she constantly protects vulnerable people around her while quietly carrying emotional pain she refuses to discuss openly. Emotionally, this realization creates genuine curiosity because unlike everyone else, he begins seeing the sadness hidden beneath her sarcastic personality and emotional distance. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear combines emotional romance, heartfelt comedy, fantasy mystery, and character-driven storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, fear of attachment, self-worth, trust, destiny, and the hope that love can emotionally save broken people who slowly stopped believing happiness was still possible. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the mysterious connection between the two lonely strangers slowly becomes stronger despite both of them trying to emotionally protect themselves from disappointment and heartbreak. Emotionally, the female lead remains deeply afraid of becoming attached because every important relationship in her life eventually ended with pain, separation, or emotional abandonment, causing her to secretly believe that love itself only creates suffering for the people closest to her. Meanwhile, the male lead continues hiding his own emotional struggles behind humor, confidence, and playful teasing even though he secretly feels emotionally lost after years of failed dreams, broken relationships, and unresolved family problems that left him feeling directionless and emotionally disconnected from the world around him. Visually, the movie continues creating a soft romantic atmosphere through crowded city streets filled with glowing lights. Peaceful cafes, rainy sidewalks, colorful apartment buildings, quiet rooftop conversations, emotional late-night walks, and small intimate moments where silence often reveals more emotion than words. Meanwhile, their relationship slowly develops through repeated accidental meetings and awkward situations that constantly force them to spend time together despite both pretending to find each other annoying. Emotionally, their conversations become increasingly personal because they slowly begin recognizing familiar loneliness hidden beneath each other's sarcasm, humor, and emotional walls. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through embarrassing misunderstandings, playful arguments, chaotic workplace incidents, awkward public encounters, and funny moments where both characters unintentionally reveal their growing emotional attachment while trying to hide it from each other. Meanwhile, rumors about the mysterious curse surrounding the female lead continue spreading throughout the neighborhood because several people connected to her past relationships suddenly disappeared from her life under strange emotional circumstances. Emotionally, these rumors continue affecting her mental state because although she wants to believe love should bring happiness, she secretly fears that emotional attachment may only bring pain and separation to the people she cares about most. Meanwhile, the male lead slowly begins noticing how deeply lonely she truly is despite constantly pretending to be emotionally independent and unaffected by others. Emotionally, this realization creates genuine compassion because he understands what it feels like to hide emotional pain behind humor and emotional distance while secretly hoping someone might finally understand the sadness buried beneath the surface. Visually, their growing connection is shown through emotional eye contact, quiet smiles, shared meals, accidental physical closeness, late-night phone calls, peaceful moments during rainstorms, and emotionally vulnerable conversations where both characters slowly begin lowering the emotional barriers protecting them from heartbreak. Meanwhile, the movie also explores the personal lives of supporting characters living around them, including struggling workers, lonely neighbors, emotionally broken families, and friends dealing with their own romantic failures and emotional insecurities. Emotionally, these supporting stories strengthen the central theme that many people secretly carry emotional wounds while pretending everything in their lives is normal and stable. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, emotional intimacy, and romantic melancholy through soft lighting, colorful reflections, emotional close-up shots, and carefully framed scenes that highlight the growing emotional connection between the lead characters. Meanwhile, the female lead begins experiencing emotional confusion because despite her fear of love, she slowly starts feeling safe and emotionally comfortable around the male lead in ways she has not experienced for years. Emotionally, this growing attachment terrifies her because she worries that allowing herself to fall in love again may eventually destroy both of them emotionally. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes increasingly determined to understand the truth behind her fears and emotional isolation because unlike others, he refuses to abandon her simply because of rumors, misunderstandings, or emotional complications. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, vulnerability, emotional healing, trust, fear of abandonment, self-worth, destiny, and the hope that genuine love can help emotionally broken people slowly rediscover happiness and human connection. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the emotional bond between the two lonely strangers becomes stronger and more complicated. Emotionally, the female lead starts struggling with feelings she has spent years trying to suppress because for the first time in a long period she begins feeling emotionally safe, understood, and genuinely cared for by someone who does not judge her fears or emotional distance. Meanwhile, the male lead slowly becomes more emotionally invested in her life despite initially treating their relationship casually and playfully. Because beneath her sarcastic attitude and emotional walls, he recognizes a deeply wounded person desperately trying to protect herself from more heartbreak and disappointment. Visually, the movie continues creating a soft romantic atmosphere through rainy evening walks, crowded street markets, glowing city lights, peaceful cafes, late-night rooftop conversations, small apartment scenes, emotional close-up shots, and warm cinematography that highlights both the beauty and loneliness hidden inside everyday life. Meanwhile, their growing relationship creates many awkward, funny, and emotionally intimate situations where both characters unintentionally reveal how much they are beginning to care about each other despite constantly pretending otherwise. Emotionally, their playful teasing slowly transforms into genuine emotional support because both begin recognizing familiar emotional pain hidden beneath each other's humor and emotional defenses. Meanwhile, rumors about the mysterious curse surrounding the female lead continue spreading throughout the neighborhood after another person connected to her emotionally suddenly leaves the city without explanation, causing many people around her to believe that anyone who becomes emotionally close to her eventually disappears from her life. Emotionally, these rumors deeply affect her mental state because although part of her wants to dismiss them as irrational superstition, she secretly fears there may be truth behind the strange pattern that has followed her for years. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through embarrassing misunderstandings, chaotic work situations, awkward accidental encounters, playful arguments, emotional silences, and heartfelt moments where both characters slowly begin lowering the emotional walls protecting them from vulnerability and attachment. Meanwhile, the male lead gradually starts investigating the truth behind her fears because unlike everyone else, he refuses to abandon her simply because of rumors or emotional complications. Emotionally, his growing determination surprises even himself because he realizes that for the first time in years he genuinely cares about another person more than his own emotional comfort or personal freedom. Visually, their relationship develops through quiet shared meals, emotional late-night phone calls, accidental physical closeness, peaceful rainstorm scenes, rooftop conversations under glowing city lights, and emotionally vulnerable moments where silence often communicates more than words. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue dealing with their own emotional struggles involving failed relationships, family pressure, loneliness, insecurity, and fear of abandonment. Emotionally, these parallel stories strengthen the movie's message that many people secretly carry emotional scars while pretending everything in their lives is stable and normal. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly begins revealing painful memories from her past, including relationships that ended suddenly, emotional betrayals, abandonment, and personal losses that slowly destroyed her belief in lasting love and emotional security. Emotionally, these confessions create deeper emotional intimacy between them because the male lead finally understands how deeply loneliness and fear have shaped her personality and emotional isolation. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, vulnerability, and romantic melancholy through soft lighting, colorful reflections, emotional close-up shots, and intimate framing that constantly highlights the growing emotional tension between the two leads. Meanwhile, the female lead becomes increasingly afraid of her own feelings because the more emotionally attached she becomes, the more terrified she feels about eventually losing him like everyone else in her past. Emotionally, this fear creates internal conflict as she struggles between wanting love and wanting to protect him from the emotional pain she believes follows her existence. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, vulnerability, emotional healing, trust, fear of abandonment, self-worth, destiny, and the hope that genuine love can emotionally heal people who slowly stopped believing happiness was still possible. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the relationship between the two emotionally wounded strangers slowly transforms into something deeper and far more meaningful. Emotionally, the female lead becomes increasingly conflicted because every moment of happiness she experiences with him also increases her fear that the mysterious patterns surrounding her life will eventually destroy their connection like every relationship before it. Meanwhile, the male lead continues trying to break through the emotional walls she built over many years of heartbreak, disappointment, and emotional abandonment, because despite her cold behavior, he now fully understands that she is simply terrified of losing another person she genuinely cares about. Visually, the movie continues creating a dreamy romantic atmosphere through glowing city lights, crowded night markets, peaceful rooftop conversations, rainy streets, cozy cafes, emotional late-night walks. Colorful reflections, and intimate close-up shots that highlight both the warmth and sadness hidden inside their growing relationship. Meanwhile, their daily interactions become softer and more emotionally intimate as playful teasing slowly turns into genuine emotional comfort and trust. Emotionally, both characters begin depending on each other in ways neither expected because for the first time in years they both feel less lonely whenever they are together. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through awkward misunderstandings. Funny public situations, workplace chaos, playful arguments, accidental romantic moments, and emotionally quiet scenes where silence reveals feelings both characters struggle to express openly. Meanwhile, the rumors surrounding the female lead continue spreading after another strange coincidence convinces people that everyone who falls in love with her eventually disappears emotionally or physically from her life. Emotionally, these rumors continue damaging her mental state because although she desperately wants to believe she deserves love, she secretly fears that emotional attachment only brings suffering to others. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes even more determined to stay beside her despite the growing pressure from people warning him to keep his distance. Emotionally, his loyalty deeply affects her because nobody in her past ever fought this hard to remain in her life once things became emotionally complicated. Visually, their connection develops through quiet shared meals, emotional late-night phone calls, accidental hand touches, comforting silences, rainstorm conversations, small acts of kindness, and intimate moments where both slowly begin revealing their deepest insecurities and emotional scars. Meanwhile, the female lead finally opens up about painful memories from her childhood and past relationships, including abandonment, betrayal, emotional neglect, and the loneliness that slowly convinced her she was destined to lose everyone she loved. Emotionally, these confessions strengthen their emotional bond because the male lead recognizes how deeply fear and loneliness have shaped her entire personality and emotional isolation. Meanwhile, he also begins revealing his own emotional wounds involving failed dreams, family conflict, personal regret, and the quiet sadness hidden behind his carefree personality and humor. Emotionally, this mutual vulnerability creates genuine intimacy because both characters finally feel emotionally understood by someone who sees beyond their defensive behavior and emotional masks. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, emotional vulnerability, and romantic melancholy through soft lighting, emotional close-up shots, colorful nighttime scenery, and carefully framed moments that highlight the growing emotional attachment between the two leads. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue struggling with their own emotional problems involving failed relationships, family pressure, loneliness, insecurity, and fear of abandonment. Emotionally, these side stories reinforce the movie's message that many people secretly carry emotional pain while pretending everything in their lives is stable and normal. Meanwhile, the female lead becomes increasingly terrified of her growing feelings because every emotional step closer to him also increases her fear that she may eventually lose him too. Emotionally, this fear creates painful internal conflict as she struggles between wanting love and wanting to protect him from the emotional suffering she believes follows her existence. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, vulnerability, emotional healing, fear of abandonment, trust, destiny, self-worth, and the belief that genuine love can emotionally save broken people who slowly stopped believing happiness was still possible. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the emotional connection between the two leads becomes impossible for either of them to ignore. Emotionally, the female lead starts experiencing genuine happiness for the first time in years because the male lead's constant presence slowly breaks the emotional isolation she built around herself after repeated heartbreak, abandonment, and disappointment destroyed her trust in relationships. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes increasingly protective of her because beneath her sarcastic humor and emotional distance he now clearly sees a deeply lonely person terrified of losing anyone she truly loves. Visually, the movie continues creating a warm romantic atmosphere through rainy city streets, glowing apartment windows, peaceful rooftop scenes, crowded cafes, colorful markets, emotional late-night conversations, and soft cinematic lighting that highlights the growing intimacy between them while maintaining the emotional melancholy surrounding their relationship. Meanwhile, their daily interactions become more natural and emotionally comfortable as playful teasing slowly transforms into genuine affection, emotional support, and quiet understanding that neither character expected to find in another person. Emotionally, both begin depending on each other emotionally because being together temporarily removes the loneliness and sadness they secretly carried for years. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through awkward misunderstandings, embarrassing encounters, workplace chaos, playful arguments, accidental romantic moments, and heartfelt scenes where both characters slowly reveal emotional vulnerabilities hidden beneath their humor and defensive behavior. Meanwhile, the rumors about the mysterious curse surrounding the female lead become even stronger after another former acquaintance unexpectedly disappears from her life shortly after reconnecting with her emotionally, causing people around her to fear that emotional attachment to her always leads to separation. Emotionally, these events deeply terrify her because although she desperately wants to believe she deserves love, she cannot ignore the painful pattern that seems to repeat throughout her life. Meanwhile, the male lead refuses to abandon her despite warnings from friends and neighbors who believe becoming emotionally involved with her may eventually destroy him emotionally as well. Emotionally, his loyalty begins changing her worldview because for the first time someone chooses to stay even after learning about her fears, emotional baggage, and painful history instead of running away from emotional complications. Visually, their relationship develops through emotional late-night phone calls, shared meals, quiet walks during rainstorms, accidental physical closeness, comforting silences, rooftop conversations beneath glowing city lights, and intimate moments where both slowly stop pretending they are emotionally unaffected by each other. Meanwhile, the female lead begins confronting painful memories from her past, including failed relationships, abandonment, emotional neglect, and moments where people she loved emotionally disappeared from her life without explanation. Emotionally, these memories continue convincing her that love only creates suffering and eventual loss no matter how beautiful it feels at the beginning. Meanwhile, the male lead also struggles internally because despite appearing confident and carefree, he secretly fears emotional failure and rejection after years spent hiding personal disappointment, family conflict, and loneliness behind humor and emotional avoidance. Emotionally, their growing honesty with each other creates deeper intimacy because both finally feel emotionally understood by someone who recognizes the sadness hidden beneath their emotional defenses. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing emotional warmth, romantic tension, vulnerability, and quiet sadness through soft lighting, emotional close-up shots, colorful nighttime scenery, and carefully framed scenes where silence often expresses feelings words cannot fully explain. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue dealing with emotional struggles involving heartbreak, insecurity, family expectations, loneliness, and fear of abandonment. Emotionally, these side stories strengthen the movie's message that many people secretly carry emotional pain while pretending everything around them is stable and normal. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly realizes she may already be falling deeply in love with him despite desperately trying to emotionally distance herself in order to protect him from the suffering she believes follows her existence. Emotionally, this realization creates painful internal conflict because she now understands that avoiding love completely may hurt even more than risking eventual heartbreak and emotional loss. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, vulnerability, emotional healing, trust, destiny, fear of abandonment, self-worth, and the possibility that genuine love can emotionally save broken people who slowly stopped believing happiness and connection were still possible. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the relationship between the two leads becomes emotionally deeper and far more complicated. Emotionally, the female lead begins realizing that her feelings for him are no longer temporary attraction or emotional comfort because she now genuinely fears losing him more than she fears her own loneliness. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes increasingly determined to remain beside her despite the growing rumors, emotional complications, and strange coincidences surrounding her life because he no longer sees her as someone cursed but as a deeply wounded person who spent years convincing herself that she did not deserve lasting love or happiness. Visually, the movie continues building its soft romantic atmosphere through glowing city nights, rainy sidewalks, crowded cafes, peaceful rooftop scenes, late-night convenience stores, colorful reflections, emotional close-up shots, and intimate moments where silence often communicates more emotion than dialogue. Meanwhile, their growing emotional attachment creates many sweet and awkward situations as both characters slowly stop pretending they are emotionally unaffected by each other's presence. Emotionally, they begin finding genuine comfort in simple moments together because for the first time in years neither feels completely alone while sharing everyday life with someone who truly understands their emotional pain and insecurities. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through workplace misunderstandings, funny public accidents, playful teasing, embarrassing encounters, chaotic neighborhood situations, and emotionally vulnerable scenes where both characters reveal fears they normally hide behind humor and sarcasm. Meanwhile, the rumors about the female lead's mysterious curse continue spreading after another emotional connection from her past unexpectedly disappears from her life, causing neighbors and acquaintances to believe that anyone who becomes deeply attached to her eventually vanishes emotionally or physically. Emotionally, these rumors slowly begin destroying her emotional stability because although she desperately wants to believe their relationship can survive, she secretly fears she may eventually become the reason he suffers heartbreak, loss, or emotional destruction. Meanwhile, the male lead continues rejecting those fears because he believes her greatest problem is not a supernatural curse but the emotional trauma and loneliness created by years of abandonment, guilt, and emotional isolation. Emotionally, his refusal to give up on her deeply affects her because nobody in her life has ever remained this patient, loyal, or emotionally supportive once her fears and emotional scars became visible. Visually, their relationship develops beautifully through shared meals, emotional late-night calls, quiet walks during heavy rain, accidental hand touches, comforting silences, emotional confessions, and peaceful rooftop conversations beneath glowing city lights where both characters slowly become emotionally honest with each other. Meanwhile, the female lead begins revealing even darker memories from her past involving painful separations, broken promises, emotional betrayal, and moments where people she loved suddenly disappeared from her life. Emotionally, these confessions expose how deeply fear and loneliness shaped her entire worldview because she slowly convinced herself that emotional attachment always leads to suffering no matter how genuine love initially feels. Meanwhile, the male lead also starts confronting his own emotional wounds involving failed ambitions, unresolved family conflict, regret, and the fear that he wasted years avoiding emotional vulnerability because he was terrified of disappointment and rejection. Emotionally, this mutual honesty creates stronger emotional intimacy because both characters finally feel emotionally seen by someone who understands the sadness hidden beneath their defensive personalities. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing romantic warmth, vulnerability, emotional melancholy, and growing intimacy through soft lighting, colorful nighttime scenery, emotional close-up shots, and carefully framed scenes that constantly highlight the emotional tension between them. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue facing struggles involving heartbreak, loneliness, insecurity, family expectations, and emotional disappointment. Emotionally, these parallel stories reinforce the film's central message that many people secretly carry emotional pain while pretending their lives are emotionally stable and normal. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly begins accepting that she may truly love him despite desperately trying to emotionally protect him from the pain she believes follows her existence. Emotionally, this realization creates intense internal conflict because she now understands that avoiding love completely may hurt far more than risking eventual heartbreak. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, trust, vulnerability, fear of abandonment, destiny, self-worth, and the possibility that genuine love can emotionally rescue broken people who slowly stopped believing happiness and connection were still possible. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the emotional relationship between the two leads reaches a turning point where both can no longer deny how deeply attached they have become to each other. Emotionally, the female lead becomes increasingly terrified because the stronger her feelings grow, the more she believes she may eventually lose him, just like everyone else who once became emotionally close to her. Meanwhile, the male lead grows more emotionally committed despite the fear and uncertainty surrounding their relationship, because he now understands that her greatest struggle is not a supernatural curse but years of emotional trauma. Abandonment, loneliness, and guilt that convinced her she was incapable of keeping love in her life. Visually, the movie continues creating a beautiful romantic atmosphere through glowing city lights, rainy evening streets, peaceful rooftop conversations, crowded cafes, late-night walks, emotional close-up shots, colorful reflections, and quiet intimate scenes where silence often reveals emotions both characters struggle to express openly. Meanwhile, their daily interactions become softer, more affectionate, and emotionally honest as playful teasing slowly transforms into genuine emotional dependence and quiet comfort neither expected to find in another person. Emotionally, both begin realizing that being together makes the loneliness they carried for years feel less painful and overwhelming. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through awkward misunderstandings, funny public accidents, workplace chaos, playful arguments, embarrassing encounters, and heartfelt moments where both characters unintentionally reveal how much they truly care about each other. Meanwhile, the rumors surrounding the female lead continue spreading after another emotional connection from her past suddenly disappears from her life without explanation, causing neighbors and acquaintances to fear that anyone who loves her will eventually vanish emotionally or physically. Emotionally, these incidents continue damaging her emotional stability because although she desperately wants to believe their relationship can survive, she secretly fears she may eventually become responsible for destroying his happiness too. Meanwhile, the male lead refuses to leave her side despite increasing pressure from others warning him about the emotional danger of becoming deeply attached to her. Emotionally, his loyalty begins changing her entire perception of love because for the first time someone willingly chooses to stay beside her even after witnessing her fears, emotional scars, and painful history instead of escaping once things become emotionally difficult. Visually, their relationship develops beautifully through emotional late-night conversations, shared meals, quiet walks during heavy rain, accidental physical closeness, comforting silences, playful romantic moments, and rooftop scenes beneath glowing city lights where both slowly begin imagining a future that includes each other. Meanwhile, the female lead starts experiencing emotional happiness she has not felt for years because being with him slowly restores her belief that love might not always end in abandonment and heartbreak. Emotionally, this growing hope also increases her fear because she now has something emotionally precious she cannot bear to lose. Meanwhile, the male lead begins confronting his own unresolved emotional wounds involving family conflict, failed ambitions, regret, and years spent emotionally avoiding vulnerability because he feared disappointment and rejection. Emotionally, their growing honesty with each other creates even deeper intimacy because both finally feel emotionally understood by someone capable of seeing beyond their emotional defenses and hidden sadness. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, vulnerability, romantic melancholy, and emotional closeness through soft lighting, colorful nighttime scenery, emotional close-up shots, and carefully framed scenes where even small gestures carry emotional meaning. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue dealing with struggles involving heartbreak, loneliness, insecurity, emotional disappointment, and family pressure. Emotionally, these side stories reinforce the movie's central message that many people secretly carry emotional wounds while pretending their lives are stable and emotionally secure. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly realizes that despite all her fear, she genuinely wants to fight for their relationship instead of running away from love once again. Emotionally, this realization marks a major emotional transformation because for the first time she begins valuing the possibility of happiness more than the safety of emotional isolation. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, vulnerability, emotional healing, trust, fear of abandonment, destiny, self-worth, emotional courage, and the possibility that genuine love can help broken people rediscover hope, happiness, and emotional connection even after years of pain and isolation. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the emotional bond between the two leads grows even stronger. Emotionally, the female lead slowly begins allowing herself to believe that happiness and lasting love might still be possible despite the fear and emotional trauma that controlled her life for many years. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes more protective and emotionally devoted because he now understands how deeply loneliness, abandonment, and guilt shaped her personality and emotional isolation. Visually, the movie continues building a dreamy romantic atmosphere through glowing city nights. Rainy sidewalks, crowded cafes, peaceful rooftops, emotional late-night walks, colorful reflections, soft lighting, and intimate close-up shots that beautifully capture the growing warmth between the two characters. Meanwhile, their relationship becomes more natural and emotionally comfortable as playful teasing slowly transforms into genuine affection, emotional trust, and quiet dependence neither expected to experience again. Emotionally, both characters begin realizing that simple moments together feel more meaningful than anything else in their lives because for the first time in years they no longer feel emotionally alone while facing their personal struggles. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through awkward misunderstandings, funny public situations, chaotic workplace incidents, playful arguments, embarrassing encounters, and emotionally vulnerable scenes where both characters accidentally reveal how deeply they care about each other. Meanwhile, the rumors surrounding the female lead continue spreading after several people connected to her past relationships remain emotionally distant or mysteriously separated from her life, causing many neighbors and acquaintances to believe that emotional attachment to her always leads to heartbreak and disappearance. Emotionally, these rumors continue haunting her because despite the happiness she now feels with him, she still secretly fears their relationship may eventually end in emotional tragedy. Meanwhile, the male lead refuses to let those fears control their future because he believes the true danger is not a curse but the emotional walls she built after years of heartbreak and abandonment. Emotionally, his constant reassurance slowly begins healing the emotional insecurities she carried for so long because nobody before ever fought this hard to remain beside her despite fear, uncertainty, and emotional complications. Visually, their connection deepens through shared meals, emotional late-night calls, quiet conversations during rainstorms, accidental hand touches, playful romantic moments, comforting silences, and peaceful rooftop scenes where both characters slowly start imagining a future together without fear or loneliness. Meanwhile, the female lead begins openly revealing painful memories she previously kept hidden, including emotional neglect, failed relationships, betrayal, and moments where people she trusted suddenly disappeared from her life. Emotionally, these confessions strengthen their emotional intimacy because the male lead finally understands how deeply fear shaped her inability to trust happiness or emotional stability. Meanwhile, the male lead also confronts his own emotional wounds involving family disappointment, failed ambitions, regret, and years spent pretending he did not care about emotional connection because he feared rejection and failure. Emotionally, their growing honesty creates genuine emotional safety because both finally feel accepted by someone capable of understanding the sadness hidden beneath their emotional defenses. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, vulnerability, romantic melancholy, and emotional closeness through soft lighting, colorful nighttime scenery, emotional close-up shots, and carefully framed scenes where even silence carries deep emotional meaning. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue facing emotional struggles involving heartbreak, insecurity, loneliness, family pressure, and fear of abandonment. Emotionally, these side stories reinforce the movie's central message that many people secretly carry emotional pain while pretending their lives are emotionally stable and happy. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly reaches a moment where she realizes she no longer wants to run away from love even if heartbreak eventually becomes unavoidable. Emotionally, this realization becomes one of the most important emotional turning points in her life because for the first time she chooses emotional courage over fear and isolation. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, vulnerability, trust, destiny, fear of abandonment, self-worth, emotional courage, and the belief that genuine love can help emotionally broken people rediscover hope, happiness, and human connection even after years of sadness and emotional isolation. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the relationship between the two leads becomes emotionally inseparable. Emotionally, the female lead slowly begins experiencing a level of happiness and emotional peace she never believed was possible after spending years trapped inside fear, loneliness, and emotional isolation created by heartbreak and abandonment. Meanwhile, the male lead grows even more emotionally attached because he no longer sees protecting her as a responsibility but as something his heart naturally wants to do. Visually, the movie continues creating a warm romantic atmosphere through glowing city lights, peaceful rooftop evenings, rainy streets, crowded cafes, colorful night markets, emotional late-night walks, soft lighting, and intimate close-up shots that beautifully highlight the growing emotional intimacy between them. Meanwhile, their relationship becomes filled with small affectionate habits, playful teasing, quiet emotional support, and moments of natural comfort that make them feel emotionally safe whenever they are together. Emotionally, both characters begin realizing they are slowly becoming the emotional home each of them spent years searching for without ever finding. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through awkward misunderstandings, funny public situations, chaotic workplace incidents, embarrassing encounters, playful arguments, and heartfelt scenes where both unintentionally reveal how deeply in love they are becoming despite trying to remain emotionally cautious. Meanwhile, the rumors surrounding the female lead continue creating emotional tension because people around them still believe anyone who becomes emotionally close to her will eventually disappear from her life. Emotionally, these fears continue haunting her mind because although she desperately wants to trust their happiness, she cannot completely ignore the painful pattern connected to her past relationships and emotional losses. Meanwhile, the male lead refuses to let fear control their relationship because he believes real love requires emotional courage instead of constant avoidance and self-protection. Emotionally, his unwavering loyalty slowly changes the way she sees herself because for the first time someone truly believes she deserves love instead of emotional isolation and loneliness. Visually, their emotional connection deepens through quiet dinners, emotional late-night conversations, comforting silences during rainstorms, accidental physical closeness, shared laughter, rooftop confessions beneath glowing city lights, and intimate moments where even simple eye contact feels emotionally powerful. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly starts imagining a future where she no longer needs to live in fear of emotional attachment or abandonment. Emotionally, this growing hope becomes both beautiful and terrifying because she now has something emotionally precious she cannot imagine losing. Meanwhile, the male lead also begins confronting unresolved pain from his own past, including failed ambitions, family conflict, regret, and years spent emotionally hiding behind humor because he feared vulnerability and disappointment. Emotionally, their growing honesty creates deeper emotional intimacy because both finally feel emotionally accepted by someone who understands the sadness hidden beneath their emotional masks. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, vulnerability, romantic melancholy, and emotional closeness through soft lighting, colorful nighttime scenery, emotional close-up shots, and carefully framed scenes where silence often communicates emotions words cannot fully express. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue facing struggles involving heartbreak, loneliness, insecurity, emotional disappointment, family pressure, and fear of abandonment. Emotionally, these side stories reinforce the film's central message that many people secretly carry emotional pain while pretending everything in their lives is emotionally stable and normal. Meanwhile, a sudden unexpected event creates new emotional tension when the male lead temporarily disappears without explanation after becoming involved in a personal family situation he kept hidden from her. Emotionally, this moment immediately awakens all of the female lead's deepest fears because she begins believing the mysterious curse surrounding her life may finally be destroying the relationship she fought so hard to protect. Visually, the emotional tone becomes heavier through lonely apartment scenes, rainy nights, unanswered phone calls, emotional silence, and heartbreaking moments where she struggles between panic, sadness, and emotional self-blame. Meanwhile, the male lead desperately tries returning to her while handling painful family conflict and unresolved personal responsibilities that suddenly force him to confront parts of his past he spent years avoiding. Emotionally, both characters now face the terrifying possibility that love may require more emotional strength and sacrifice than either originally expected. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, vulnerability, trust, destiny, fear of abandonment, emotional courage, self-worth, sacrifice, and the belief that genuine love can survive even when fear, pain, and uncertainty threaten to destroy it. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the sudden disappearance of the male lead completely shatters the emotional stability the female lead had slowly built after finally allowing herself to believe in love again. Emotionally, she becomes overwhelmed by fear, panic, and heartbreak because the situation feels painfully similar to every emotional loss and abandonment she experienced in the past, causing her to believe the mysterious curse surrounding her life may once again be destroying someone she deeply loves. Meanwhile, the male lead struggles through an emotionally painful family crisis involving unresolved conflict, hidden personal guilt, and responsibilities he avoided for years because he feared confronting the emotional damage buried inside his past. Visually, the movie shifts into a heavier emotional atmosphere through lonely apartment scenes, dark rainy nights, unanswered phone calls, empty cafes, quiet city streets, emotional close-up shots, and melancholic cinematography that captures the crushing loneliness both characters feel while separated from each other. Meanwhile, the female lead begins emotionally withdrawing from everyone around her because she convinces herself that allowing people to love her only leads to pain, separation, and emotional suffering. Emotionally, these fears become even stronger when neighbors and acquaintances continue spreading rumors that anyone emotionally connected to her eventually disappears from her life, causing her to spiral deeper into guilt, sadness, and emotional isolation. Visually, the film carefully balances heartbreak with softer emotional moments through flashbacks showing their happier memories together, including rooftop conversations, playful teasing, shared meals, comforting silences during rainstorms, late-night walks, and intimate emotional confessions that now feel painfully distant and fragile. Meanwhile, the male lead desperately tries contacting her while struggling with emotional pressure from his family's situation because he realizes that running away emotionally only repeats the same mistakes that ruined important relationships in his past. Emotionally, he begins understanding that genuine love requires emotional honesty, courage, and commitment even when fear and personal pain make escape feel easier. Visually, his personal storyline explores strained family relationships, emotional regret, childhood disappointment, and unresolved pain through emotionally tense conversations, quiet moments of reflection, and scenes where he finally confronts truths about himself he spent years hiding behind humor and emotional avoidance. Meanwhile, the female lead reaches her emotional breaking point after convincing herself that losing him proves she was never meant to experience lasting happiness or emotional connection. Emotionally, her fear transforms into emotional self-destruction because she begins pushing away friends, isolating herself completely, and emotionally preparing to accept loneliness as her permanent future in order to avoid hurting anyone else again. Visually, the movie emphasizes her emotional collapse through dim apartment lighting, rainy window scenes, sleepless nights, emotional silence, lonely walks through crowded streets, and heartbreaking close-up shots that reveal how deeply hopeless and emotionally exhausted she has become. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them begin realizing how much both leads genuinely love each other despite their emotional fears and misunderstandings. Emotionally, several friends and neighbors attempt helping the female lead understand that love cannot survive without emotional trust and communication. While others encourage the male lead to stop running away from vulnerability and finally fight for the relationship he truly values, visually the cinematography continues emphasizing emotional vulnerability, romantic melancholy, and loneliness through soft lighting, nighttime city scenery, emotional close-up shots, and carefully framed scenes where silence often feels more emotionally painful than spoken words. Meanwhile, the male lead finally decides to return after realizing that losing her would become the greatest regret of his life because she is the first person who ever made him feel emotionally understood and genuinely accepted despite all his flaws and insecurities. Emotionally, his decision marks a major transformation because for the first time he chooses emotional responsibility and love instead of fear and emotional escape. Meanwhile, the female lead struggles between desperately wanting him back and believing she should emotionally let him go in order to protect him from the pain she believes follows her existence. Emotionally, this internal conflict becomes unbearable because she now understands how deeply she truly loves him despite spending years trying to avoid emotional attachment. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, vulnerability, trust, fear of abandonment, emotional courage, sacrifice, self-worth, forgiveness, and the belief that genuine love can survive even when fear, heartbreak, and emotional pain threaten to tear two people apart. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the emotional distance between the two leads becomes almost unbearable. Emotionally, the female lead struggles to hide the heartbreak caused by his sudden disappearance because despite trying to convince herself that isolation is safer than love, she now realizes how deeply empty and painful life feels without him beside her. Meanwhile, the male lead returns emotionally exhausted after confronting painful family conflicts, unresolved guilt, and years of emotional avoidance that forced him to finally recognize how much fear controlled his decisions and relationships. Visually, the movie maintains its melancholic romantic atmosphere through rainy streets, lonely apartment scenes, quiet cafes, glowing nighttime city lights, emotional close-up shots, and soft cinematography that reflects the sadness and emotional vulnerability both characters now carry. Meanwhile, the female lead initially refuses to see him because she believes reconnecting emotionally will only repeat the same cycle of heartbreak, abandonment, and emotional suffering that has haunted her entire life. Emotionally, she convinces herself that loving someone means eventually losing them, and therefore emotional distance is the only way to protect both herself and the people she cares about. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes determined to prove that running away was his mistake and not the result of any curse surrounding her existence. Emotionally, he finally understands that his fear of vulnerability caused him to escape difficult emotions instead of fighting for the relationship that genuinely mattered most to him. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with softer romantic moments through painful conversations, awkward reunions, emotional silences, flashbacks of happier memories, and scenes where both characters clearly still love each other despite the emotional walls growing between them. Meanwhile, friends and neighbors around them begin encouraging reconciliation because everyone can see how emotionally broken both have become while separated from each other. Emotionally, these outside perspectives slowly force the female lead to question whether fear and guilt have controlled her life for too long and prevented her from accepting the possibility of genuine happiness. Visually, their emotional tension is beautifully shown through quiet rooftop meetings, emotional late-night conversations, accidental encounters during rainstorms, hesitant eye contact, trembling emotional confessions, and carefully framed scenes where even small gestures carry deep emotional meaning. Meanwhile, the male lead openly apologizes for disappearing and finally reveals the painful truth about his family struggles, personal fears, emotional insecurities, and years spent hiding vulnerability behind humor because he believed emotional attachment only led to disappointment and failure. Emotionally, his honesty deeply affects the female lead because for the first time someone chooses emotional transparency instead of abandoning her when life becomes emotionally difficult. Meanwhile, she also begins admitting how much fear shaped her life after repeated emotional losses convinced her she was somehow destined to hurt or lose everyone she loved. Emotionally, this mutual vulnerability creates one of the strongest emotional moments in the story because both characters finally stop hiding behind emotional defenses and allow each other to fully see their sadness, fears, and emotional scars. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing vulnerability, romantic melancholy, emotional warmth, and growing intimacy through soft lighting, colorful nighttime scenery, emotional close-up shots, and quiet scenes where silence often communicates more emotion than words ever could. Meanwhile, supporting characters continue dealing with emotional struggles involving loneliness, heartbreak, insecurity, family pressure, and fear of abandonment. Emotionally, these parallel stories reinforce the movie's message that many people spend their lives emotionally hiding from pain instead of allowing themselves to experience connection, vulnerability, and healing. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly begins realizing that avoiding love completely has only created deeper loneliness and emotional suffering rather than protecting her from pain. Emotionally, this realization marks another major emotional turning point because she finally starts understanding that genuine love always carries risk, but emotional isolation can destroy happiness just as painfully as heartbreak. Visually, the emotional atmosphere slowly becomes warmer again as the two leads cautiously begin rebuilding trust through small acts of kindness, emotional honesty, shared memories, and quiet moments of comfort that remind them why they fell in love in the first place. Meanwhile, both characters now understand that saving their relationship will require emotional courage, trust, honesty, and the willingness to face fear together instead of running away from it separately. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, vulnerability, trust, fear of abandonment, forgiveness, emotional courage, self-worth, and the belief that genuine love can survive even after heartbreak, separation, and years of emotional pain. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the two leads slowly begin rebuilding the emotional trust that was damaged by fear, misunderstanding, and separation. Emotionally, the female lead still struggles with deep insecurity because although she wants to believe their love can survive, she remains terrified that happiness in her life never lasts for long before something painful destroys it. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes more emotionally mature and determined after finally confronting his family problems and personal fears because he now understands that running away from emotional vulnerability only creates more loneliness and regret. Visually, the movie slowly shifts back toward a warmer romantic atmosphere through glowing city nights, peaceful rooftop conversations, rainy evening walks, crowded cafes, emotional close-up shots, soft lighting, and colorful reflections that beautifully capture the fragile hope beginning to grow between them again. Meanwhile, their relationship becomes more emotionally honest than ever before because both finally stop hiding behind sarcasm, emotional distance, and defensive humor. Emotionally, they begin openly discussing their fears, insecurities, regrets, and emotional wounds instead of pretending everything is fine while secretly suffering alone. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through awkward reconciliation moments, playful teasing, embarrassing encounters, funny neighborhood situations, emotional misunderstandings, and heartfelt conversations where both characters slowly rediscover the comfort and happiness they lost during their separation. Meanwhile, the rumors surrounding the female lead continue causing emotional pressure because many people around them still believe anyone emotionally attached to her will eventually disappear or suffer heartbreak. Emotionally, these fears still haunt her mind even though part of her now wants to fight against them instead of surrendering to emotional isolation again. Meanwhile, the male lead refuses to let fear control their future because he believes love becomes meaningless if people allow anxiety and guilt to destroy every chance at happiness before it even has time to grow. Emotionally, his confidence slowly helps the female lead regain emotional strength because for the first time someone is choosing to stay beside her not out of obligation or pity but because he genuinely loves her despite all the uncertainty surrounding their relationship. Visually, their emotional connection deepens through quiet dinners, shared laughter, comforting silences during rainstorms, emotional late-night phone calls, accidental hand touches, rooftop confessions beneath glowing city lights. and peaceful scenes where both begin imagining a future together without constantly expecting emotional disaster. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue facing struggles involving loneliness, failed relationships, insecurity, family pressure, heartbreak, and emotional disappointment. Emotionally, these side stories continue reinforcing the movie's central message that everyone secretly carries emotional scars while searching for connection, acceptance, and understanding. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly starts confronting the deeper source of her fears by realizing that the so-called curse may actually represent years of emotional trauma, abandonment, guilt, and unresolved pain rather than supernatural fate. Emotionally, this realization becomes extremely important because she begins understanding that fear itself may have been controlling her life more powerfully than any mysterious curse ever could. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing emotional warmth, vulnerability, romantic melancholy, and growing intimacy through soft lighting, emotional close-up shots, colorful nighttime scenery, and carefully framed scenes where silence carries deep emotional meaning. Meanwhile, the male lead begins making serious sacrifices in order to prove his commitment, including repairing broken family relationships, abandoning emotionally unhealthy habits, and prioritizing emotional honesty over avoidance for the first time in his life. Emotionally, these actions deeply affect the female lead because she finally realizes that genuine love requires effort, courage, patience, and emotional responsibility rather than simply depending on destiny or luck. Meanwhile, both characters slowly start believing that happiness may actually be possible if they are willing to face fear, uncertainty, and emotional pain together instead of separately. Emotionally, this growing hope becomes both beautiful and frightening because after years of loneliness they now have something emotionally precious they cannot bear to lose again. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, vulnerability, emotional healing, trust, forgiveness, fear of abandonment, emotional courage, self-worth, destiny, and the belief that genuine love can emotionally heal broken people brave enough to stop running away from connection and happiness. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the emotional relationship between the two leads becomes stronger and more genuine after surviving heartbreak, misunderstanding, and separation. Emotionally, the female lead slowly begins accepting that love does not always need to end in abandonment or emotional destruction, even though fear and insecurity still remain deeply rooted inside her heart after years of loneliness and disappointment. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes increasingly devoted because he now understands that loving someone truly means staying beside them even when emotional pain, uncertainty, and fear make everything feel difficult and unstable. Visually, the movie continues building its warm romantic atmosphere through glowing nighttime city lights, rainy evening streets, crowded cafes, peaceful rooftop conversations, emotional close-up shots, quiet support, affectionate habits, and honest conversations neither character would have been emotionally capable of having earlier in the story. Emotionally, both begin realizing that genuine connection feels less like dramatic passion and more like emotional safety, understanding, and knowing someone will remain beside you even during painful moments. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through awkward romantic situations, embarrassing public encounters, funny misunderstandings, neighborhood chaos, playful arguments, and emotionally vulnerable scenes where both characters accidentally reveal how deeply they now depend on each other emotionally. Meanwhile, the rumors surrounding the female lead continue creating emotional tension because many people still believe she brings heartbreak and separation to anyone emotionally close to her. Emotionally, these rumors continue affecting her confidence because despite her growing happiness, she still fears losing him someday and falling back into emotional isolation once again. Meanwhile, the male lead constantly reassures her that fear should not control their future because every relationship carries uncertainty and emotional risk regardless of destiny or superstition. Emotionally, his loyalty and emotional patience slowly help her understand that love cannot survive if people spend every moment expecting disaster instead of appreciating happiness while it exists. Visually, their emotional connection deepens through shared meals, emotional late-night talks, Comforting silences during rainstorms, accidental physical closeness, rooftop confessions beneath glowing city lights, playful romantic moments, and peaceful scenes where both characters slowly begin building small dreams about the future together. Meanwhile, the female lead starts reconnecting emotionally with people around her after years spent isolating herself from emotional attachment because she finally begins believing that loneliness is not the only future available to her. Emotionally, this transformation becomes one of the most important changes in her life because she slowly learns to value emotional connection instead of constantly fearing eventual loss. Meanwhile, the male lead also continues healing emotionally by repairing damaged family relationships, confronting personal regret, and finally abandoning the emotional avoidance that once controlled his decisions and prevented genuine intimacy. Emotionally, their relationship now becomes a source of emotional growth for both characters because they help each other confront fears neither could overcome alone. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, romantic melancholy, vulnerability, and emotional closeness through soft lighting, emotional close-up shots, colorful nighttime scenery, and carefully framed scenes where silence often communicates more emotion than dialogue. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue facing struggles involving heartbreak, insecurity, loneliness, emotional disappointment, family pressure, and fear of abandonment. Emotionally, these side stories continue reinforcing the movie's message that nearly everyone secretly carries emotional pain while searching for acceptance, healing, and meaningful human connection. Meanwhile, the female lead finally begins questioning whether the mysterious curse surrounding her life ever truly existed or whether fear, trauma, and emotional self-sabotage created the painful cycle she believed controlled her destiny. Emotionally, this realization becomes deeply liberating because she slowly starts understanding that she deserves happiness, love, and emotional stability despite all the pain she experienced in the past. Meanwhile, both leads begin moving toward a future built not on fear or emotional avoidance but on trust, honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to face uncertainty together. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, vulnerability, trust, forgiveness, emotional courage, fear of abandonment, self-worth, destiny, and the belief that genuine love can emotionally transform broken people brave enough to stop hiding from happiness and connection. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the relationship between the two leads reaches its most emotionally important stage. Emotionally, the female lead slowly begins letting go of the fear and guilt that controlled her entire life because for the first time she truly believes she deserves happiness, love, and emotional stability instead of endless loneliness and heartbreak. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes more emotionally confident and mature after realizing that genuine love requires patience, honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to remain beside someone even when fear and uncertainty make everything feel fragile. Visually, the movie continues creating a beautiful romantic atmosphere through glowing city nights, rainy streets, peaceful rooftop conversations, crowded cafes, emotional late-night walks, soft lighting, colorful reflections, and intimate close-up shots that perfectly capture the emotional warmth and vulnerability growing between them. Meanwhile, their relationship becomes filled with natural comfort, affectionate habits, emotional honesty, and quiet support as both characters slowly stop viewing love as something temporary or dangerous. Emotionally, they begin understanding that true connection means accepting another person completely, including their fears, emotional scars, insecurities, and painful past experiences instead of expecting perfection. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through playful teasing, awkward romantic situations, funny misunderstandings, neighborhood chaos, embarrassing encounters, and heartfelt emotional moments where both characters openly express feelings they once desperately tried hiding. Meanwhile, the rumors surrounding the female lead slowly begin losing their emotional power because people around them start realizing that the real problem was never a supernatural curse but the emotional trauma and fear created by years of abandonment, heartbreak, and emotional isolation. Emotionally, this realization becomes incredibly important for the female lead because she finally stops blaming herself for every painful loss that happened in her life and begins emotionally freeing herself from years of guilt and self-hatred. Meanwhile, the male lead continues proving his devotion through emotional consistency, honesty, and patience because unlike people from her past, he refuses to disappear whenever emotional difficulties appear. Emotionally, his actions slowly teach her that genuine love is not about avoiding pain completely but about facing emotional struggles together instead of alone. Visually, their connection deepens beautifully through shared meals, comforting silences during rainstorms, emotional late-night conversations, rooftop confessions beneath glowing city lights, playful romantic moments, accidental physical closeness, and peaceful scenes where both characters begin imagining a future filled with stability, happiness, and emotional peace. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue facing struggles involving heartbreak, insecurity, loneliness, family pressure, emotional disappointment, and fear of abandonment. Emotionally, these side stories continue reinforcing the movie's central message that many people spend years emotionally hiding from pain instead of allowing themselves to experience vulnerability, connection, and healing. Meanwhile, the female lead finally confronts one of her deepest fears by openly admitting that she loves him and cannot imagine returning to the emotionally empty life she lived before meeting him. Emotionally, this confession becomes one of the most powerful moments in the story because it represents her complete emotional transformation from someone terrified of attachment into someone finally willing to fight for happiness despite the possibility of heartbreak. Meanwhile, the male lead also openly admits that meeting her changed the way he views life, love, and emotional responsibility because she helped him stop running away from vulnerability and finally confront the emotional emptiness hidden behind his carefree personality. Emotionally, both characters now understand that their relationship healed parts of themselves they once believed were permanently broken. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, vulnerability, romantic melancholy, emotional closeness, and healing through soft lighting, emotional close-up shots, colorful nighttime scenery, and carefully framed scenes where even silence feels emotionally intimate and meaningful. Meanwhile, the emotional atmosphere of the movie slowly shifts from fear and sadness toward hope, healing, and emotional rebirth as both leads begin embracing the possibility of a future built on trust, honesty, emotional courage, and genuine human connection. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, trust, vulnerability, forgiveness, self-worth, emotional courage, fear of abandonment, destiny, and the belief that genuine love can emotionally transform people brave enough to stop hiding from happiness and connection. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as both leads finally begin experiencing emotional peace after spending most of their lives trapped by fear, loneliness, heartbreak, and emotional insecurity. Emotionally, the female lead now feels stronger and more emotionally confident because she no longer sees herself as someone cursed to destroy every relationship around her. Instead, she slowly begins accepting that many of her fears were created by emotional trauma, abandonment, and years of believing she did not deserve lasting happiness or love. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes even more emotionally devoted because he realizes that staying beside her helped him overcome his own fear of vulnerability, failure, and emotional responsibility. Visually, the movie creates an even warmer romantic atmosphere through glowing city lights, peaceful cafes, rainy evening walks, colorful night markets, rooftop conversations beneath soft lights, emotional close-up shots, and intimate scenes filled with quiet emotional comfort and affection. Meanwhile, their relationship becomes more natural and emotionally stable as playful teasing transforms into genuine emotional partnership where both openly support each other during moments of fear, sadness, stress, and emotional uncertainty. Emotionally, both characters begin understanding that love is not about perfection or constant happiness but about choosing to remain together even during emotionally painful situations. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through awkward public encounters, funny misunderstandings, neighborhood chaos, playful arguments, emotional confessions, and heartfelt scenes where both characters openly express emotions they once spent years hiding behind sarcasm and emotional distance. Meanwhile, the people around them slowly stop believing in the mysterious curse after witnessing how much happier and emotionally healthier the female lead has become since allowing herself to trust love instead of running away from emotional attachment. Emotionally, this growing acceptance from others helps her finally let go of years of guilt, shame, and self-blame because she begins understanding that emotional pain and heartbreak are part of being human rather than proof that she is somehow dangerous to love. Meanwhile, the male lead continues repairing broken relationships within his own family while also confronting unresolved regrets and insecurities that once made him emotionally avoid commitment and vulnerability. Emotionally, these personal changes strengthen their relationship because both characters are no longer depending on love to escape loneliness but instead learning how to emotionally grow together while supporting each other honestly and patiently. Visually, their emotional connection deepens through shared meals, peaceful mornings together, emotional late-night conversations, comforting silences during rainstorms, accidental affectionate moments. Rooftop confessions beneath glowing city lights, and quiet scenes where even simple gestures carry deep emotional meaning, meanwhile supporting characters around them continue facing struggles involving heartbreak, insecurity, loneliness, emotional disappointment, family expectations, and fear of abandonment. Emotionally, these side stories continue reinforcing the movie's message that everyone secretly carries emotional wounds while searching for acceptance, healing, stability, and meaningful human connection. Meanwhile, the female lead finally visits places connected to painful memories from her past relationships and emotional losses. Emotionally, this journey becomes deeply symbolic because instead of feeling trapped by sadness, she now begins confronting those memories with emotional strength and acceptance rather than fear and self-hatred. Meanwhile, the male lead stays beside her throughout this emotional process because he understands that healing from trauma requires patience, emotional safety, and the reassurance that someone will remain present even during difficult emotional moments. Emotionally, their relationship now feels stronger because both finally trust each other enough to be emotionally vulnerable without fear of immediate abandonment or rejection. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, emotional healing, romantic intimacy, vulnerability, and quiet happiness through soft lighting, colorful nighttime scenery, emotional close-up shots, and carefully framed scenes where silence often expresses love more powerfully than words. Meanwhile, both characters slowly begin imagining a future together involving emotional stability, shared dreams, personal growth, and a life no longer controlled by fear or loneliness. Emotionally, this growing hope becomes one of the most beautiful transformations in the story because both finally stop surviving emotionally and start genuinely living. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, vulnerability, trust, forgiveness, emotional courage, self-worth, destiny, fear of abandonment, and the belief that genuine love can emotionally heal broken people brave enough to stop hiding from happiness, connection, and the possibility of lasting emotional peace. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the emotional journey between the two leads enters its most mature and emotionally meaningful phase. Emotionally, the female lead finally begins living without constantly expecting abandonment, heartbreak, or emotional disaster because after years spent believing she was cursed to lose everyone she loved, she slowly starts accepting that fear controlled her life far more powerfully than fate ever did. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes emotionally stronger and more dependable because his relationship with her forced him to confront every part of himself he previously ignored, including insecurity, emotional avoidance, unresolved family pain, fear of failure, and the loneliness hidden behind his playful personality. Visually, the movie creates an even warmer and more emotionally peaceful atmosphere through glowing nighttime city lights, rainy evening streets, quiet cafes, peaceful apartment scenes, colorful reflections, emotional rooftop conversations, soft cinematography, and intimate close-up shots that beautifully capture the emotional safety and comfort growing between them. Meanwhile, their relationship slowly transforms from uncertain romance into genuine emotional partnership where both characters openly rely on each other during moments of stress, sadness, fear, exhaustion, and emotional vulnerability without feeling ashamed or afraid of being judged. Emotionally, this evolution becomes incredibly important because both finally understand that real love is not about escaping pain completely but about having someone willing to remain beside you while facing life's emotional difficulties together. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through playful teasing, awkward public situations, neighborhood chaos, embarrassing misunderstandings, emotional confessions, funny arguments, and heartfelt scenes where both characters naturally express affection in ways that feel emotionally honest and deeply human rather than exaggerated or unrealistic. Meanwhile, the female lead continues confronting painful memories connected to her past, including abandoned relationships, emotional betrayal, loneliness, and years spent blaming herself for every emotional loss she experienced. Emotionally, this process remains painful because healing forces her to relive moments where she genuinely believed she would never deserve lasting happiness or emotional stability. Meanwhile, the male lead supports her patiently throughout these emotional struggles because he finally understands that emotional healing cannot happen instantly and that love sometimes means quietly remaining present even when someone feels emotionally broken or lost. Emotionally, his emotional consistency becomes one of the most healing experiences of her life because unlike others from her past, he does not disappear once emotional pain becomes difficult or uncomfortable. Visually, their emotional intimacy deepens through shared mornings, quiet dinners, emotional late-night talks, peaceful rainstorm scenes, comforting silences, accidental affectionate gestures, emotional eye contact, and beautifully framed rooftop moments beneath glowing city lights where both characters begin speaking openly about dreams and futures they were once too emotionally afraid to imagine. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue struggling with heartbreak, loneliness, family pressure, insecurity, emotional disappointment, failed relationships, and fear of abandonment. Emotionally, these side stories continue reinforcing the film's central message that every person secretly carries emotional wounds while searching for acceptance, healing, stability, and meaningful human connection. Meanwhile, the rumors surrounding the female lead's supposed curse slowly disappear as people around her begin recognizing how fear, emotional trauma, and self-isolation shaped her life far more than any supernatural force ever could. Emotionally, this realization becomes liberating because she finally stops viewing herself as emotionally dangerous to love and instead starts seeing herself as someone worthy of care, trust, understanding, and lasting affection. Meanwhile, the male lead also continues repairing damaged relationships within his family after years of emotional distance and avoidance. Emotionally, these efforts become difficult because confronting old pain forces him to admit mistakes, regrets, and emotional weaknesses he spent years hiding behind humor and emotional detachment. However, the female lead encourages him to stop punishing himself for the past and instead focus on becoming emotionally honest and emotionally available in the present. Emotionally, their relationship now becomes a source of mutual healing because both help each other confront fears they never could overcome alone. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, romantic intimacy, emotional vulnerability, healing, and quiet happiness through soft lighting, emotional close-up shots, colorful nighttime scenery, peaceful apartment moments, and carefully framed scenes where even silence feels emotionally comforting rather than lonely. Meanwhile, both characters slowly begin creating a shared life together through simple routines, emotional honesty, small acts of care, playful affection, and conversations about future possibilities that once felt impossible because fear controlled every emotional decision they made. Emotionally, these peaceful everyday moments become more meaningful than dramatic romance because after years of loneliness, both finally understand the beauty of emotional stability, trust, and simply having someone who chooses to stay. Meanwhile, the female lead experiences one final emotional breakdown after revisiting memories connected to people she once lost. Emotionally, she fears that no matter how much healing she experiences, she may still someday lose the person she now loves more deeply than anyone else. However, instead of emotionally withdrawing like she would have in the past, she finally allows herself to cry openly, express fear honestly, and depend emotionally on someone else without shame. Emotionally, this moment represents the complete transformation of her character because she no longer sees vulnerability as weakness but as an important part of genuine love and emotional connection. Meanwhile, the male lead reassures her that love can never promise permanent safety from pain or loss, but that fear should never prevent people from embracing happiness while it exists. Emotionally, his words finally help her understand that meaningful love always carries emotional risk, yet remaining emotionally isolated guarantees loneliness and regret. Visually, the emotional atmosphere of the movie becomes increasingly hopeful and peaceful through warm lighting, romantic city scenery, emotional embraces, quiet smiles, playful conversations, and intimate scenes filled with emotional honesty instead of fear and emotional distance. Meanwhile, both characters begin fully embracing the possibility of building a future together based not on fantasy or perfection but on trust, patience, forgiveness, vulnerability, emotional courage, and the willingness to continue choosing each other even during difficult moments. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, trust, vulnerability, forgiveness, fear of abandonment, self-worth, emotional courage, trauma, acceptance, and the belief that genuine love can emotionally transform broken people brave enough to stop hiding from happiness, intimacy, and meaningful human connection. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as both leads slowly settle into a calmer and emotionally healthier chapter of their lives after surviving the fear, heartbreak, misunderstandings, and emotional isolation that once controlled nearly every decision they made. Emotionally, the female lead now feels more emotionally secure than ever before because for the first time she no longer wakes up expecting abandonment, disappointment, or emotional disaster to destroy her happiness without warning. Meanwhile, the male lead continues becoming more emotionally mature and dependable because loving her forced him to confront years of emotional avoidance, insecurity, unresolved regret, and the fear of vulnerability that once prevented him from maintaining deep emotional relationships. Visually, the movie creates an emotionally comforting atmosphere through glowing apartment windows, peaceful cafes, rainy nighttime streets, soft morning sunlight, emotional rooftop conversations, colorful city reflections, intimate close-up shots, and warm cinematography that beautifully captures the quiet stability both characters slowly build together. Meanwhile, their relationship becomes increasingly natural and emotionally balanced as they learn how to handle disagreements, stress, insecurity, and emotional exhaustion without immediately pushing each other away or retreating into emotional isolation like they once did. Emotionally, this growth becomes one of the most important developments in the story because both finally understand that genuine love is not simply about romantic excitement but about emotional patience, honesty, trust, forgiveness, and the willingness to continue choosing each other even during emotionally difficult moments. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through awkward domestic situations, playful teasing, funny neighborhood encounters, embarrassing misunderstandings, emotional confessions, and heartfelt scenes where small everyday interactions slowly become the strongest proof of how deeply connected they have grown. Meanwhile, the female lead continues processing emotional trauma connected to her past relationships and years spent believing she was somehow responsible for every painful separation she experienced. Emotionally, these memories still hurt her deeply because part of her remains afraid that happiness can disappear at any moment without warning. However, instead of hiding those fears, she now openly shares them with the male lead who patiently listens and reassures her without judgment. Emotionally, this emotional openness becomes incredibly healing because she finally experiences what it feels like to be emotionally supported instead of emotionally abandoned whenever life becomes painful or complicated. Meanwhile, the male lead also continues confronting unresolved family pain and personal regret after years spent pretending emotional problems could simply disappear if ignored long enough. Emotionally, he realizes that emotional avoidance only created more loneliness and damaged relationships while genuine healing requires honesty, vulnerability, and accountability. Visually, their emotional intimacy deepens beautifully through quiet breakfasts together, emotional late-night conversations, comforting silences during rainstorms, accidental affectionate gestures. Shared laughter inside small apartments, peaceful rooftop scenes beneath glowing city lights, and carefully framed moments where even ordinary routines feel emotionally meaningful because both spent so many years living emotionally disconnected from others. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue struggling with heartbreak, loneliness, insecurity, family expectations, emotional disappointment, fear of abandonment, and the difficulty of trusting love after emotional pain. Emotionally, these parallel stories continue reinforcing the movie's central message that many people secretly carry invisible emotional wounds while pretending their lives are stable and emotionally complete. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly begins rebuilding emotional connections with old friends and people she once distanced herself from because fear convinced her emotional attachment only caused suffering. Emotionally, this transformation becomes deeply symbolic because instead of protecting herself through isolation, she now chooses emotional connection despite understanding that vulnerability always involves risk. Meanwhile, the male lead encourages her growth while also learning how to stop defining himself through past mistakes and emotional failures. Emotionally, both characters now inspire each other toward emotional healing rather than emotionally depending on each other out of loneliness or fear. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, emotional vulnerability, healing, romantic intimacy, and quiet happiness through soft lighting, emotional close-up shots, colorful nighttime scenery, peaceful apartment moments, and intimate framing where silence often feels emotionally safe and comforting rather than painful or lonely. Meanwhile, both leads slowly begin discussing future dreams involving shared responsibilities, emotional stability, personal growth, and building a life together that feels grounded in trust and emotional honesty rather than fantasy or unrealistic perfection. Emotionally, these conversations become deeply meaningful because for most of their lives neither truly believed a peaceful future built around genuine emotional connection was possible for them. Meanwhile, the female lead experiences moments of lingering fear whenever unexpected changes happen around her because trauma taught her that happiness could vanish suddenly without warning. However, instead of emotionally shutting down, she now allows herself to rely on the male lead emotionally while also trusting her own emotional strength and growth. Emotionally, this represents one of the most important changes in her character because she finally learns that emotional courage does not mean never feeling fear but choosing love and connection despite fear still existing inside her heart. Meanwhile, the male lead also realizes that protecting someone emotionally does not mean shielding them from all pain but standing beside them honestly and patiently through uncertainty. Emotionally, their relationship now feels stronger precisely because both stopped pretending they are emotionally perfect and instead learned how to accept each other's fears, insecurities, weaknesses, and emotional scars without judgment. Visually, the emotional atmosphere of the movie becomes increasingly peaceful and hopeful through warm apartment scenes, romantic nighttime walks, playful conversations, emotional embraces, soft music, quiet smiles, and beautifully intimate moments where both characters finally appear emotionally present rather than emotionally trapped inside memories of pain and abandonment. Meanwhile, both now fully understand that lasting love is created not through destiny or fantasy but through consistent emotional effort, vulnerability, trust, forgiveness, patience, and the courage to remain emotionally available even after experiencing heartbreak and disappointment. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, trust, vulnerability, forgiveness, trauma, self-worth, fear of abandonment, emotional courage, acceptance, personal growth, and the belief that genuine love can emotionally transform broken people brave enough to stop hiding from happiness, intimacy, and meaningful human connection. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as both leads begin experiencing a quieter and more emotionally grounded phase of their relationship where love is no longer driven by fear, confusion, or emotional desperation but instead by trust, emotional honesty, patience, and the comfort of knowing someone genuinely chooses to remain beside them every day. Emotionally, the female lead finally starts understanding that healing does not mean forgetting painful memories or eliminating fear completely, but learning how to live without allowing past heartbreak and trauma to control every emotional decision. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes increasingly emotionally stable and responsible because his relationship with her taught him that emotional maturity requires honesty, consistency, vulnerability, and the willingness to stay emotionally present even when life becomes difficult or emotionally overwhelming. Visually, the movie creates an emotionally peaceful atmosphere through warm apartment lighting, rainy evening walks, glowing city streets, peaceful cafes, rooftop sunsets, colorful reflections, emotional close-up shots, and intimate cinematography that beautifully captures the emotional calmness slowly replacing the loneliness and fear that once dominated their lives. Meanwhile, their relationship becomes filled with ordinary but deeply meaningful moments, including cooking together, sharing quiet conversations before sleep, comforting each other during stressful days, playful teasing during small misunderstandings, and spending peaceful time together without needing dramatic emotional declarations to feel connected. Emotionally, these simple routines become incredibly important because both characters spent years emotionally isolated and never believed they could experience such stable affection and emotional safety with another person. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through awkward domestic situations, funny neighborhood encounters, playful arguments, embarrassing public misunderstandings, emotional confessions, and heartfelt scenes where small gestures often reveal more love than words themselves. Meanwhile, the female lead still occasionally struggles with lingering fear whenever unexpected situations remind her of painful memories connected to abandonment and emotional loss. Emotionally, those moments continue hurting because trauma does not disappear instantly even after healing begins. However, instead of emotionally withdrawing, she now openly shares her fears with the male lead, who patiently reassures her without making her feel weak or emotionally damaged. Emotionally, this emotional safety becomes one of the most healing experiences of her life because she finally learns what it feels like to be emotionally accepted completely instead of judged. Meanwhile, the male lead also continues facing emotional challenges connected to his family and personal regrets after years spent emotionally avoiding responsibility and vulnerability. Emotionally, he now understands that real emotional strength comes not from pretending pain does not exist but from confronting difficult emotions honestly without running away from them. Visually, their emotional intimacy deepens beautifully through shared meals, emotional late-night talks, comforting rainstorm scenes, accidental affectionate moments, peaceful rooftop conversations beneath glowing city lights, quiet laughter inside small apartments, and carefully framed moments where even silence feels emotionally warm rather than lonely. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue struggling with loneliness, heartbreak, family expectations, insecurity, emotional disappointment, failed relationships, and fear of vulnerability. Emotionally, these side stories continue reinforcing the film's message that nearly everyone secretly carries emotional scars while searching for connection, acceptance, stability, and genuine understanding. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly begins helping others around her emotionally after realizing how many people silently suffer while pretending everything in their lives is normal and emotionally stable. Emotionally, this growth becomes symbolic because she transforms from someone consumed by fear and emotional isolation into someone capable of offering emotional comfort and empathy to others. Meanwhile, the male lead admires her emotional growth because he sees how much courage it took for her to stop hiding from connection and happiness after years spent believing she would only hurt the people she loved. Emotionally, both characters now recognize that their relationship changed them in ways far deeper than romance because they helped each other rediscover emotional hope, self-worth, and the courage to trust love again after years of disappointment and loneliness. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing emotional warmth, vulnerability, healing, romantic intimacy, and peaceful happiness through soft lighting, colorful nighttime scenery, emotional close-up shots, gentle music, and intimate framing where ordinary moments feel emotionally beautiful because of the honesty shared between the characters. Meanwhile, both leads slowly begin discussing long-term dreams involving shared responsibilities, emotional stability, personal growth, and building a future together based not on fantasy but on realistic emotional trust and mutual understanding. Emotionally, these conversations become deeply moving because both spent most of their lives believing lasting emotional connection was impossible for people as emotionally damaged and fearful as themselves. Meanwhile, the female lead eventually realizes that although fear may never disappear completely, she no longer wants fear to decide how much love and happiness she allows herself to experience. Emotionally, this realization marks one of the final stages of her emotional healing because she finally chooses emotional courage over emotional avoidance, even while understanding vulnerability always involves risk. Meanwhile, the male lead also learns that love is not about rescuing someone from pain completely but about creating a relationship where both people feel emotionally safe enough to face pain honestly together. Emotionally, their bond now feels stronger because it is built not on fantasy or dependency but on emotional trust, vulnerability, patience, forgiveness, and the willingness to remain emotionally available through uncertainty and change. Visually, the emotional atmosphere of the movie becomes increasingly warm and hopeful through romantic city walks, playful conversations, emotional embraces, peaceful mornings, soft music, glowing nighttime scenery, and quiet intimate moments where both characters finally seem emotionally free from the loneliness and fear that once controlled their lives. Meanwhile, both now fully understand that genuine love is not something that magically removes pain but something that makes pain easier to survive because nobody has to face emotional struggles completely alone anymore. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, vulnerability, trust, forgiveness, self-worth, trauma, emotional courage, fear of abandonment, acceptance, personal growth, and the belief that genuine love can emotionally transform broken people brave enough to stop hiding from happiness, intimacy, and meaningful human connection. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as both leads slowly begin embracing a future that once felt emotionally impossible for them. Emotionally, the female lead now feels more emotionally alive and hopeful than at any other point in her life because after years of isolation, guilt, heartbreak, and fear, she finally experiences the quiet comfort of being loved without constantly expecting abandonment or emotional disaster. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes increasingly certain that meeting her completely transformed his understanding of love, responsibility, vulnerability, and emotional connection because before her he spent most of his life emotionally hiding behind humor and emotional distance in order to avoid disappointment and rejection. Visually, the movie creates a deeply comforting and romantic atmosphere through glowing nighttime city lights, peaceful apartment scenes, rainy evening walks, quiet cafes, colorful reflections, emotional rooftop conversations, soft cinematography, and intimate close-up shots that beautifully capture the emotional warmth and calmness, slowly replacing the fear and loneliness that once defined both characters. Meanwhile, their relationship now feels emotionally stable and natural because instead of constantly struggling against fear and misunderstanding, they begin building everyday routines together filled with quiet affection, emotional honesty, playful teasing, comforting support, and simple moments that gradually become more meaningful than dramatic romantic gestures. Emotionally, these peaceful experiences become incredibly powerful because both characters spent years believing emotional safety and stability were things meant for other people rather than themselves. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through funny neighborhood situations, awkward domestic moments, playful misunderstandings, emotional confessions, embarrassing public encounters, and heartfelt scenes where even ordinary conversations carry emotional depth because of how much both characters have emotionally survived together. Meanwhile, the female lead still occasionally experiences moments of fear whenever painful memories from her past unexpectedly return. Emotionally, those moments remind her how deeply trauma shaped her identity for many years and how strongly she once believed she was incapable of keeping love in her life without eventually losing it. However, instead of emotionally withdrawing from the male lead, she now allows herself to rely on him honestly and emotionally without shame. Emotionally, this trust becomes one of the most important signs of her emotional growth because she finally understands that vulnerability is not weakness but an essential part of genuine intimacy and connection. Meanwhile, the male lead also continues confronting unresolved emotional wounds connected to family conflict, regret, and years spent emotionally avoiding responsibility because he feared failure and emotional disappointment. Emotionally, his growth becomes equally important because he finally stops running away from difficult emotions and instead chooses honesty, patience, and emotional accountability even when confronting painful truths about himself. Visually, their emotional intimacy deepens through shared mornings together, emotional late-night talks, comforting silences during rainstorms, accidental affectionate gestures, peaceful rooftop scenes beneath glowing city lights. Quiet laughter inside small apartments, and beautifully framed moments where silence itself feels emotionally meaningful and safe. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue facing struggles involving heartbreak, loneliness, family expectations, insecurity, emotional disappointment, fear of vulnerability, and failed relationships. Emotionally, these parallel stories continue reinforcing the film's central message that many people silently carry emotional wounds while pretending their lives are emotionally stable and complete. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly begins helping people around her emotionally by encouraging them not to hide from love and vulnerability simply because of fear or past heartbreak. Emotionally, this transformation becomes deeply symbolic because someone who once believed emotional attachment only caused suffering now inspires others to embrace emotional connection and healing despite uncertainty and pain. Meanwhile, the male lead watches her emotional growth with admiration because he understands how much courage it took for her to stop defining herself through trauma, guilt, and fear after spending so many years emotionally trapped inside loneliness and emotional self-blame. Emotionally, both characters now recognize that their relationship saved them not because it magically removed pain from their lives but because it taught them how to survive emotional pain together instead of facing everything alone. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, emotional intimacy, healing, romantic vulnerability, and peaceful happiness through soft lighting, colorful nighttime scenery, emotional close-up shots, gentle music, and intimate framing where ordinary moments feel emotionally beautiful precisely because of the emotional honesty shared between the characters. Meanwhile, both leads begin seriously discussing long-term future plans involving shared responsibilities, emotional stability, personal dreams, and building a life together based on trust, communication, vulnerability, and mutual emotional support rather than fantasy or unrealistic expectations. Emotionally, these conversations become deeply touching because both spent most of their lives believing lasting emotional happiness was impossible for people carrying so much emotional damage and insecurity. Meanwhile, the female lead eventually realizes that even if fear and sadness occasionally return, they no longer control her decisions because she finally values emotional connection more than emotional self-protection. Emotionally, this realization marks one of the final stages of her emotional transformation because she now fully accepts that meaningful love always involves emotional risk, yet refusing love guarantees loneliness and regret. Meanwhile, the male lead also realizes that emotional strength does not come from pretending to be fearless but from remaining emotionally available even when vulnerability feels uncomfortable or uncertain. Emotionally, their relationship now feels stronger than ever because it is built on honesty, emotional patience, forgiveness, trust, acceptance, and the willingness to keep choosing each other despite fear, insecurity, or uncertainty about the future. Visually, the emotional atmosphere of the movie becomes increasingly hopeful and peaceful through romantic city walks, emotional embraces, playful conversations, soft music, glowing nighttime scenery, warm apartment scenes, and quiet intimate moments where both characters finally appear emotionally free from the fear and loneliness that once dominated their lives. Meanwhile, both now fully understand that genuine love cannot guarantee permanent happiness or protection from pain but can create emotional safety, healing, trust, and the courage to keep moving forward together despite uncertainty. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, trust, vulnerability, forgiveness, trauma, self-worth, emotional courage, acceptance, fear of abandonment, personal growth, and the belief that genuine love can emotionally transform broken people brave enough to stop hiding from happiness, intimacy, and meaningful human connection. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as the emotional journey of the two leads approaches its most peaceful and emotionally complete stage. Emotionally, the female lead now finally lives without constantly expecting every happy moment to suddenly disappear, because after years of believing she was cursed to lose everyone she loved, she slowly understands that fear and emotional trauma shaped her life far more than destiny ever did. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes fully emotionally committed not only to their relationship but also to becoming the kind of emotionally honest and dependable person he once believed he could never become, because loving her forced him to confront every emotional weakness he spent years avoiding. Visually, the movie creates an atmosphere filled with warmth, calmness, and emotional intimacy through glowing city nights, peaceful apartment scenes, rainy streets reflecting colorful lights, quiet cafes, emotional rooftop conversations, soft cinematography, and intimate close-up shots that beautifully capture the emotional safety both characters now feel together. Meanwhile, their relationship becomes deeply grounded in ordinary but meaningful routines, including cooking meals together, sharing emotional conversations late at night, comforting each other during stressful moments, laughing during small misunderstandings, and quietly enjoying each other's company without needing dramatic romance to feel emotionally connected. Emotionally, these peaceful experiences become more valuable than grand emotional gestures because both characters spent most of their lives emotionally lonely and never believed stable love could exist for people carrying so much fear and pain inside them. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through awkward domestic situations, funny public encounters, playful teasing, emotional confessions, neighborhood chaos, embarrassing misunderstandings, and heartfelt scenes where simple actions reveal how deeply both characters now trust and depend on each other emotionally. Meanwhile, the female lead occasionally continues struggling with painful memories from her past relationships and moments where emotional abandonment convinced her she was somehow responsible for every loss she experienced. Emotionally, those memories still affect her because emotional scars do not disappear instantly even after healing begins. However, unlike before, she no longer faces those emotions alone because the male lead patiently remains beside her without judgment. Emotionally, this emotional support becomes one of the most transformative experiences of her life because she finally learns that genuine love does not disappear when emotional pain becomes difficult or inconvenient. Meanwhile, the male lead also continues healing emotionally by repairing damaged family relationships, confronting old regrets, and learning how to communicate honestly instead of emotionally hiding behind humor and avoidance whenever situations become emotionally uncomfortable. Emotionally, his growth becomes deeply meaningful because he finally understands that vulnerability and emotional openness require far more courage than emotional detachment ever did. Visually, their emotional intimacy deepens beautifully through quiet mornings together, emotional late-night talks during rainstorms, peaceful rooftop scenes beneath glowing city lights, accidental affectionate moments, comforting embraces, shared laughter inside small apartments, and carefully framed scenes where even silence feels emotionally warm and secure instead of lonely or painful. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue facing struggles involving heartbreak, loneliness, family expectations, insecurity, emotional disappointment, fear of vulnerability, and the difficulty of trusting love after emotional trauma. Emotionally, these side stories continue reinforcing the film's central message that nearly everyone secretly carries emotional wounds while searching for acceptance, stability, healing, and meaningful human connection. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly becomes a source of emotional strength for people around her because after overcoming her own fear and loneliness, she begins encouraging others not to emotionally isolate themselves simply because life once hurt them deeply. Emotionally, this transformation becomes symbolic because someone who once viewed herself as emotionally dangerous now helps others rediscover hope, vulnerability, and emotional courage. Meanwhile, the male lead admires her emotional growth because he understands how difficult it was for her to stop defining herself through fear. Guilt and abandonment after years spent emotionally trapped inside loneliness and emotional self-protection. Emotionally, both characters now recognize that their relationship changed them permanently because instead of simply falling in love, they helped each other emotionally survive, heal, and rediscover parts of themselves they believed were permanently broken. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, healing, romantic intimacy, emotional vulnerability, and peaceful happiness through soft lighting. Emotional close-up shots, colorful nighttime scenery, gentle music, and intimate framing where ordinary moments feel emotionally beautiful because of the honesty and emotional safety shared between the characters. Meanwhile, both leads begin seriously planning a future together involving shared responsibilities, emotional stability, personal growth, and building a life based on communication, patience, trust, forgiveness, and mutual emotional support rather than fantasy or unrealistic perfection. Emotionally, these future plans become deeply moving because both spent most of their lives believing lasting emotional happiness was impossible for people carrying so much emotional fear and insecurity. Meanwhile, the female lead eventually realizes that although pain and uncertainty will always remain part of life, she no longer wants fear to decide how much love, happiness, and emotional connection she allows herself to experience. Emotionally, this realization completes her emotional transformation because she finally chooses vulnerability and emotional courage over isolation and emotional self-protection. Meanwhile, the male lead also realizes that genuine love is not about rescuing someone from every painful experience but about remaining emotionally present, honest, patient, and supportive even during uncertainty. Emotionally, their relationship now feels stronger precisely because it is built on emotional honesty instead of fantasy and on trust instead of fear. Visually, the emotional atmosphere of the movie becomes increasingly hopeful, calm, and emotionally fulfilling through romantic city walks, emotional embraces, playful conversations, soft music, warm apartment scenes, glowing nighttime scenery, and quiet intimate moments where both characters finally appear emotionally free from the loneliness and fear that once dominated their lives. Meanwhile, both now fully understand that genuine love cannot remove all sadness or guarantee permanent happiness but can create emotional safety, healing, acceptance, trust, and the courage to continue facing life together despite uncertainty. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, vulnerability, trust, forgiveness, trauma, self-worth, emotional courage, acceptance, fear of abandonment, personal growth, and the belief that genuine love can emotionally transform broken people brave enough to stop hiding from happiness, intimacy, and meaningful human connection. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as both leads enter the most emotionally peaceful period of their journey together. Emotionally, the female lead finally begins trusting happiness instead of constantly preparing herself for emotional loss because after spending years believing love always ended in abandonment and heartbreak, she now understands that emotional pain is a natural part of life rather than proof she was cursed or unworthy of connection. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes fully emotionally grounded and dependable because his relationship with her taught him how to stop escaping difficult emotions and instead face fear, responsibility, and vulnerability with honesty and emotional maturity. Visually, the movie creates a deeply comforting atmosphere through glowing nighttime city lights, rainy evening walks, peaceful apartment scenes, quiet cafes, emotional rooftop conversations, warm soft lighting, colorful reflections, and intimate close-up shots that beautifully capture the emotional calmness and trust now existing between the two characters. Meanwhile, their relationship becomes filled with ordinary but emotionally meaningful moments, including preparing meals together, supporting each other during stressful days, laughing over small misunderstandings, enjoying peaceful silence together, sharing emotional conversations late at night, and finding comfort simply through each other's presence rather than through dramatic romance or emotional intensity. Emotionally, these everyday experiences become incredibly valuable because both characters spent most of their lives emotionally disconnected and never believed stable love and emotional safety could truly exist for people carrying so much fear. insecurity, and emotional trauma inside them. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through playful teasing, awkward public situations, funny neighborhood encounters, emotional confessions, embarrassing misunderstandings, and heartfelt scenes where even small gestures reveal how deeply both characters now understand and emotionally trust each other. Meanwhile, the female lead occasionally still experiences moments of sadness whenever memories connected to past abandonment and emotional loneliness unexpectedly return. Emotionally, those memories continue hurting because emotional scars never completely disappear even after healing begins. However, unlike earlier in her life, she no longer faces those emotions alone or hides them behind emotional isolation because she now allows herself to rely on the male lead honestly and without shame. Emotionally, this emotional openness becomes one of the most important signs of her healing because she finally understands that vulnerability creates connection rather than weakness. Meanwhile, the male lead also continues confronting unresolved emotional issues connected to family expectations, regret, and years spent emotionally avoiding responsibility because he feared disappointing others and emotionally failing the people he cared about. Emotionally, his personal growth becomes deeply meaningful because he finally learns that emotional strength comes from honesty, patience, and emotional availability rather than from pretending pain and insecurity do not exist. Visually, their emotional intimacy deepens beautifully through peaceful rooftop scenes beneath glowing city lights, comforting rainstorm conversations, quiet mornings together, accidental affectionate gestures, emotional late-night talks, shared laughter inside small apartments, and carefully framed scenes where even silence feels emotionally comforting instead of lonely or painful. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue facing struggles involving heartbreak, loneliness, insecurity, family pressure, fear of vulnerability, emotional disappointment, and the difficulty of trusting love after painful experiences. Emotionally, these side stories continue reinforcing the film's central message that nearly everyone secretly carries emotional wounds while searching for understanding, healing, acceptance, and meaningful human connection. Meanwhile, the female lead slowly becomes emotionally inspiring to others around her because after overcoming years of fear and self-blame, she begins encouraging people not to emotionally abandon themselves simply because life once hurt them deeply. Emotionally, this transformation becomes symbolic because someone who once believed she only brought sadness into people's lives now becomes a source of comfort, empathy, and emotional courage for others struggling with loneliness and emotional pain. Meanwhile, the male lead admires her emotional transformation because he understands how much courage it took for her to stop hiding from vulnerability and happiness after spending so many years emotionally trapped by fear and abandonment. Emotionally, both characters now fully recognize that their relationship changed them permanently because instead of simply giving each other romance, they helped each other rediscover emotional hope, self-worth, trust, and the courage to remain emotionally open despite uncertainty and pain. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, healing, romantic intimacy, emotional vulnerability, and peaceful happiness through soft lighting, emotional close-up shots, colorful nighttime scenery, gentle music, and intimate framing where ordinary moments feel emotionally beautiful because of the emotional honesty and safety shared between the characters. Meanwhile, both leads continue planning a future together involving emotional stability, shared responsibilities, personal dreams, and a life built on communication, trust, patience, forgiveness, vulnerability, and mutual emotional support instead of unrealistic fantasy or emotional dependency. Emotionally, these future plans become deeply emotional because both spent most of their lives believing lasting happiness and emotional connection were impossible for people carrying so much fear, regret, and emotional damage. Meanwhile, the female lead eventually reaches a moment where she fully understands that although love cannot guarantee permanent safety from pain or loss, it still remains worth embracing because emotional isolation only creates deeper loneliness and regret. Emotionally, this realization completes her emotional healing because she finally chooses connection, vulnerability, and hope instead of fear. Meanwhile, the male lead also realizes that genuine love means continuing to emotionally choose someone every day through honesty, Patience, and emotional presence even when life becomes uncertain or painful. Emotionally, their relationship now feels stronger than ever precisely because both stopped searching for perfection and instead learned how to love each other honestly despite emotional scars, insecurities, fears, and past mistakes. Visually, the emotional atmosphere of the movie becomes increasingly warm, hopeful, and emotionally fulfilling through romantic city walks, playful conversations, emotional embraces, glowing nighttime scenery, peaceful apartment moments, soft music, and quiet intimate scenes where both characters finally appear emotionally free from the fear and loneliness that once controlled their lives. Meanwhile, both now fully understand that genuine love is not about escaping pain forever but about creating emotional safety, healing, trust, and the courage to continue facing life together even when uncertainty remains. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, vulnerability, trust, forgiveness, trauma, self-worth, emotional courage, acceptance, fear of abandonment, personal growth, and the belief that genuine love can emotionally transform broken people brave enough to stop hiding from happiness, intimacy, and meaningful human connection. My Love Will Make You Disappear continues as both leads finally begin living the kind of emotionally peaceful life they once believed was impossible for people carrying so much loneliness, fear, regret, and emotional trauma inside them. Emotionally, the female lead now fully understands that healing does not erase painful memories or completely remove fear from life but instead gives people the strength to continue loving and trusting others even while carrying emotional scars from the past. Meanwhile, the male lead becomes more emotionally fulfilled than ever before because his relationship with her taught him that genuine happiness does not come from avoiding vulnerability or emotional responsibility but from remaining emotionally honest, patient, and present with the people who truly matter. Visually, the movie creates an atmosphere filled with warmth, intimacy, and emotional calmness through glowing city nights, rainy streets reflecting colorful lights, peaceful apartment scenes, quiet cafes, emotional rooftop conversations, soft cinematography, warm lighting, and intimate close-up shots that beautifully capture the emotional safety and comfort now existing between the two characters. Meanwhile, their relationship becomes increasingly grounded in ordinary but deeply meaningful routines including cooking together, sharing quiet emotional conversations before sleep, comforting each other during stressful moments, laughing during awkward misunderstandings, supporting each other's dreams, and simply enjoying peaceful silence together without fear of emotional distance or abandonment. Emotionally, these small everyday experiences become more important than dramatic romance because both spent most of their lives emotionally isolated and never believed such emotional stability and safety could truly exist for them. Visually, the film carefully balances emotional drama with romantic comedy through playful teasing, funny neighborhood encounters, awkward public situations, embarrassing misunderstandings, emotional confessions, and heartfelt scenes where even the smallest gestures reveal how deeply both characters now understand, trust, and emotionally depend on each other. Meanwhile, the female lead still occasionally experiences moments where painful memories from her past unexpectedly return and remind her of the years she spent believing she was emotionally dangerous to love. Emotionally, those moments still hurt because trauma leaves emotional marks that never completely disappear. However, unlike before, she no longer allows fear to isolate her emotionally because she now trusts the male lead enough to openly share her sadness and insecurities without shame or self-hatred. Emotionally, this emotional trust becomes one of the clearest signs of her transformation because she finally stops seeing vulnerability as weakness and instead understands it as an essential part of genuine emotional intimacy and healing. Meanwhile, the male lead also continues growing emotionally by repairing damaged family relationships, confronting unresolved regret, and learning how to communicate honestly instead of emotionally escaping whenever situations become painful or overwhelming. Emotionally, his growth becomes equally meaningful because he finally realizes that emotional courage comes not from pretending to be fearless but from remaining emotionally open even when vulnerability feels uncomfortable or uncertain. Visually, their emotional intimacy deepens beautifully through quiet rooftop moments beneath glowing city lights, peaceful rainstorm conversations, emotional late-night talks, shared laughter inside small apartments. Accidental affectionate gestures, comforting embraces, and carefully framed scenes where silence itself feels emotionally warm, intimate, and safe rather than lonely or painful. Meanwhile, supporting characters around them continue struggling with heartbreak. Loneliness, insecurity, family pressure, fear of abandonment, emotional disappointment, and the difficulty of trusting love after painful experiences. Emotionally, these side stories continue reinforcing the film's central message that nearly everyone secretly carries emotional wounds while searching for understanding, healing, acceptance, stability, and meaningful human connection. Meanwhile, the female lead gradually becomes someone others emotionally rely on because after surviving her own loneliness and fears, she develops deep empathy for people silently struggling with emotional pain and self-doubt. Emotionally, this transformation becomes symbolic because someone who once isolated herself from emotional attachment now actively encourages others to remain emotionally open despite the possibility of heartbreak or disappointment. Meanwhile, the male lead deeply admires her emotional growth because he understands how difficult it was for her to stop defining herself through trauma, guilt, and abandonment after years spent emotionally trapped by fear and emotional self-protection. Emotionally, both characters now fully recognize that their relationship changed them permanently because instead of simply giving each other romance, they helped each other rediscover emotional hope, trust, self-worth, vulnerability, and the courage to continue loving despite uncertainty and pain. Visually, the cinematography continues emphasizing warmth, healing, romantic intimacy, emotional vulnerability, and peaceful happiness through soft lighting, emotional close-up shots, colorful nighttime scenery, gentle music, and intimate framing where ordinary moments feel emotionally beautiful precisely because of the emotional honesty and safety shared between the characters. Meanwhile, both leads continue seriously discussing their future together, involving emotional stability, personal growth, shared dreams, mutual emotional support, and building a life based on communication, patience, forgiveness, trust, vulnerability, and acceptance instead of unrealistic fantasy or emotional dependency. Emotionally, these conversations become deeply touching because both spent most of their lives believing lasting happiness and emotional security were impossible for people carrying so much emotional fear, regret, and loneliness inside them. Meanwhile, the female lead eventually reaches complete emotional acceptance by understanding that even though life will always contain uncertainty, sadness, and the possibility of loss, she no longer wants fear to prevent her from fully experiencing love, happiness, and meaningful connection while those moments exist. Emotionally, this realization completes the emotional journey she began at the start of the story because she finally chooses hope and vulnerability over emotional isolation and fear. Meanwhile, the male lead also realizes that genuine love is not about protecting someone from every painful experience but about remaining emotionally available, patient, supportive, and honest through every difficult moment life brings. Emotionally, their relationship now feels stronger than ever precisely because both stopped searching for perfect happiness and instead learned how to love each other honestly despite insecurities, emotional scars, fears, and painful memories. Visually, the emotional atmosphere of the movie becomes increasingly peaceful, warm, and emotionally fulfilling through romantic city walks, emotional embraces, playful conversations, glowing nighttime scenery, peaceful apartment moments, soft music, and quiet intimate scenes where both characters finally appear emotionally free from the loneliness and fear that once controlled every part of their lives. Meanwhile, both now fully understand that genuine love cannot guarantee permanent happiness or protect people from every future heartbreak but can create emotional safety, healing, trust, acceptance, and the courage to continue facing life together even when uncertainty remains. Visually, My Love Will Make You Disappear continues blending romantic comedy, emotional drama, fantasy mystery, and heartfelt storytelling while exploring themes of loneliness, emotional healing, vulnerability, trust, forgiveness, trauma, self-worth, emotional courage, acceptance, fear of abandonment, personal growth, and the belief that genuine love can emotionally transform broken people brave enough to stop hiding from happiness, intimacy, and meaningful human connection.